Hi, I'm Mark Tyrrell of Uncommon Knowledge and HypnosisDownloads.com, and welcome to the Secrets of a Happy Marriage, relationship strategies that make your marriage work. Now, imagine this. He looks wearily at her, shakes his head and asks, "Whatever happened to us? We don't laugh anymore. We used to always be laughing." She looks back at him, contempt leaking like a North Sea oil spill, and she replies, "Yes, but not at the same time." This one line of comedy within a classic moment from the British sitcom Fawlty Towers illuminated an entire relationship, one built on contempt, distrust, and weariness. It might not seem like it always, but a happy, long-lasting marriage really is possible. Of course, no one should stay in an abusive marriage. If you're being abused and bullied, then your spouse has defaulted on the deal, as it were, anyway. Remember the love and to cherish part of the vows. But our throwaway society may mean that perfectly good relationships are too quickly discarded because they don't seem ideal. The irony is that the modern obsession with personal fulfillment, the importance of the self at the expense of the other, has left more people unfulfilled, sad and lonely. Kind of backfire effect. Marriages crash and burn as spouses are updated for newer, better versions. Have the ideas of commitment, duty and responsibility been ditched at the expense of happiness? A happy marriage is healthy. Marriage may seem as old-fashioned as sepia tone, but repeated research shows that people who remain married to one partner are the happiest. Research has found that people who remain married to one partner are the happiest, and that married people are statistically happier and live longer than their non-married counterparts. Do we even know why some marriages work and some don't? Fortunately, we do. We now know that happy marriages should avoid certain things, and also what needs to be encouraged to make marriages healthier and happier. And this has been researched in great detail over many decades. Of course, no marriage is perfect, but many are happy. Happy marriages have difficulties, but there is an abiding sense of us, not just me or you. Follow these strategies, both of you, and who knows, maybe you'll be telling me 50 years hence of all the health, psychological benefits and happiness that you've enjoyed. So first, number one, be realistic with your relationship expectations. Romance is wonderful, and seeing the best in your partner is a sure way to maintain love and intimacy. But you're going to have years with your spouse, so you need to be able to accept some imperfections from them, as to they will have to overlook some of yours. In the first throes of passion, the object of our romantic focus may seem perfect to us, but then we discover, bit by bit, that they have feet of clay, and familiarity breeds less excitement, at least. At this point, for the marriage to last, we need to see beyond personal weaknesses and foibles. After all, no one is perfect. All marriages, of course, need work sometimes, and expecting it all to be effortless, or that it should always be perfect, creates disappointment, and as unrealistic expectations always do. Idealize your partner by all means, but remember they are human. Number two, sorry should not be the hardest word. Have you ever noticed how some people can never apologize? Never admit that they were wrong, never say sorry. Well, those are the ones who are much less likely to become or stay married, or even to stay in a relationship. There was a survey conducted in San Francisco which found that people who stay happily married are twice as likely to be able and willing to apologize to their partners as divorced or single people are. So people who are good at getting divorced tend to be more likely to not be able to say sorry. The survey found happily married people are 25% more likely to apologize first, even if they only feel partially to blame. So it's a very important thing. The harder divorced and single people found it ever to apologize or make conciliatory gestures, the more likely they were to stay single. Romance and passion may bring couples together, but compromise and respect will keep them there. Learn to say sorry. Tip number 3, drive those relationship-ruining riders out of town. Some couples argue passionately, but still have happy marriages. Others argue less, but when they do, the relationship is severely damaged. So it's the way you argue that's important. So what's the difference? It's not whether you argue, but how you argue that determines the likelihood that your marriage will survive long term. So this is really important. US psychologist John Gottman has spent almost 2 decades studying the interaction of couples, just watching couples interact with one another. And he can now reliably tell with up to 95% accuracy which couples are destined for relationship breakdown and which are likely to stay together by simply listening to the first 5 minutes of a contentious discussion between the couples. So John Gottman highlights 4 factors that rot relationships, and he can spot these within the first 5 minutes of a contentious conversation. He calls these dramatically the 4 riders of the apocalypse, and they are, firstly, number 1, contempt. Name-calling, face-pulling, cursing at and insulting your partner, and basically behaving as if you're revolted by them, is contempt. Gottman and his researchers in Seattle found that if contempt was a regular feature in the startup phase of a disagreement, then the relationship's days were very likely to be numbered. Women who looked contemptuous whilst their husbands were speaking were 6 times more likely to be divorced 2 years later. Okay, so drive out contempt. Okay, we can complain about someone's behavior without criticizing them as a human being. Number 2, defensiveness. Why are you picking on me? Don't look at me like that. What's your problem? But what if I was just offering you a cup of tea? Another major predictor of eventual relationship breakdown is over-defensiveness. If someone begins yelling as soon as their partner broaches a subject and feels overly threatened or attacked, and this is a continual and regular feature of the couple's interactions, then the relationship is in crisis or likely to end. Okay. Being defensive, this isn't to say that all of us aren't defensive occasionally, but being defensive a lot blocks communication and severs intimacy. 3, don't criticize, but do compliment. Partners who criticize one another a lot risk damaging their relationship beyond repair. Often contempt is carried through the communication of a criticism. So this doesn't mean that you should never complain if your spouse upsets you, but a criticism is much more damaging than a simple complaint. And there is a difference. When you criticize, you attack the core being, the whole person, even if that's not your intention. A complaint is directed at one-off behaviors rather than the core identity of the person. For example, you are such a lazy fill in the bleep implies that you're always like that. That's what you are, not just today. This is fundamentally who you are. You're such a so-and-so. And that's criticism. It's not specific. It's not time limited to today or to this specific situation. This is what you're like. I thought you were a bit lazy today. That's not like you is a complaint. Or I was upset that you didn't bring the milk when I asked you to. It's a complaint, it's specific. Some partners feel they're trying to improve their spouse by constantly pointing out what's wrong with them. Even if the intention is good, the consequences aren't good. Okay. Criticizing partners publicly is the worst. It's humiliating for both partners. It doesn't reflect well on you if you criticize your partner publicly. But saying nice things about them when in company is a wonderful thing to do. People in happy marriages feel appreciated loved, and respected. Remind your spouse of their talents, their strengths, and what you love and like about them much more. It's easy to think, well, they know all that anyway, but people like to hear it and they need to hear it. No one likes to feel they're under constant attack. 4, the fourth rider of the apocalypse, withdrawal, or stonewalling as it's sometimes called. Emotionally withdrawing or stonewalling, closing your ears or shutting off when a partner is complaining rather than criticizing, is another huge predictor of relationship breakdown. Whilst criticizing was generally more of a female trait, men used more stonewalling, more shutting off. Men's biology is less able to cope with strong emotion than women's, so men may instinctively try to avoid entering arguments or becoming highly aroused by stonewalling, by shutting off, by going into their cave. Okay, now, I'm stereotyping here, of course there are exceptions to these patterns, but this is generally what the research found. The partner may withdraw during conversations by switching off, or ultimately spend more and more time away from the relationship as a way of escaping. The danger is that the stonewalling pattern will become permanent, and the partner using this strategy will use it to isolate themselves from potentially positive parts of the relationship. Everyone needs space, of course, but never responding to an emotional issue leaves the other partner out in the cold. And of course, one rider of the apocalypse can appear in response to another rider of the apocalypse. Okay. So rather surprisingly, if even just one of these factors, or riders, as John Gottman dramatically called them, is present regularly in a marriage, in disputes that the couple are having, the outlook for the relationship is poor. Does your marriage contain any of these riders? Okay, really think about this. And how else can you make your marriage happier? Number 4, know what not to talk about in your marriage. Younger couples often want to dig deep to unearth all the issues, to be entirely open with one another and to talk about everything, to talk everything through. But this isn't necessarily the best strategy all the time. Studies of elderly couples who've been married happily for decades showed that these couples often don't listen very carefully to what the other is saying when expressing negative emotion. Okay, it's interesting. They also tend to ignore their own feelings about the relationship unless they consider that something absolutely must be done. So rather than assuming that everything's a disaster, it's like the natural turbulence on a flight. Okay, you just don't need to pay that much mind to it. This threshold is set much higher than in younger couples. So the typical advice, perhaps of old so-called agony aunts in newspapers, to air issues and get everything out in the open, doesn't, after all, make for healthy long-term relationships. Agreeing to disagree and knowing which subjects to steer clear of is a key relationship skill. Number 5, work out problems but keep a lid on them. Another key factor in arguments within relationships that survive is the habit of changing the subject once the discussion has run its course. This quick shift strategy lessens the amount of negative emotion experienced and decreases the likelihood of later rumination. It also conveys a message we can argue and still get on with each other. Thus, the argument is contained and doesn't contaminate the whole relationship. Disagreements need to be one-off specials, not long-running serials. But fun is vital too. So tip number 6, laugh together, stay together. Regularly revisiting romantic times from the past and alluding to them in conversation. Wasn't it wonderful when we did such and such? And do you remember when? Is a powerful way of staying bonded. But regularly laughing together may be even more powerful. According to recent research, couples who laugh together and regularly reminisce about funny times tend to be much more satisfied with their relationship. So remembering times you've laughed together, create a reservoir of funny times and revisit them often. A lack of fun can wilt a marriage like a flower being denied water. Tip number 7, ensure 5 good times for every bad time. According to Dr. John Gottman, stable marriages need 5 good interactions for every not so good one. And this was an equation that stood good across all kinds of marriages. So good could mean a loving hug, a fun afternoon spent together, or a nice chat about a movie, anything positive. A bad interaction may be a row or disagreement or a disappointment. So make efforts to keep the 5-to-1 rule. This will work even better if you follow the next tip. Number 8. Can you read love maps? You might remember the old Mr. and Mrs. TV show. I think it might have been updated more recently, but anyway, the idea was basically this. The host would ask one partner to go behind a soundproof screen, whilst the remaining partner was asked questions about their partner's life and preferences. For example, a question might be something like, where in the world would your wife most like to travel? What would her favorite dream destination be? Or what drink would your husband most likely order in a restaurant? And the idea was that the more correlated the answers were, the stronger the relationship was, or that was the implication anyway. And research seems to bear this out. The more you know your partner's tastes, the things they would like, the things they love, their favorite movies and so forth, their aspirations, whom they like and dislike at work and so on, the better love map you have in your mind of your partner. Knowing the details of your partner's inner and outer life, whilst allowing for some privacy as well, of course, makes for a stronger bond. On the flip side, one woman I worked with didn't know the name of her underappreciated husband's company, the company that was keeping her clothed and fed. Okay? And one husband couldn't tell me the name of their family dog, much to his wife's consternation, because, you know, she said he just shows no interest. And it was true. He didn't know the name of their dog. He didn't know what the children were doing at school. He didn't know anything about his wife's day-to-day world. So strengthen and update your love maps to better navigate your relationship. Living within a happy marriage is one way to ensure long-lasting contentment for both of you. Follow these tips and ask your partner to watch this as well, perhaps. Mind you, sometimes you can learn by watching what not to do. And if you want a fun way of doing that, watch reruns of Fawlty Towers. So I hope you found that useful, and if you did, please hit like and subscribe. And if you want to hear when my next video is published, hit the notification bell below. I'm Mark Tyrrell of Uncommon Knowledge and hypnosisdownloads.com. And if you'd like to try some of my personal development products, head over to hypnosisdownloads.com and take a look around. And thanks for watching.